David Berkowitz was born Richard David Falco on the 1st of June 1953. He was born in Brooklyn, New York. After he was born to his mother Elizabeth Broder and father Joseph Kleinman, he was sent off to live with Jewish adoptive parents Nathan and Pearl Berkowitz. His real mother was extremely poor and didn't feel that she could give her child the best start in life. His adoptive parents renamed him David Richard Berkowitz. David grew up in a loving home, and although he had turned to petty crimes such as theft and bullying, he was actually a very intelligent child. Sadly, his adoptive mother Pearl died when he was just 14 years old. David adored Pearl and was distraught at her passing. He later, at the age of 18, joined the US Army. He was honourably discharged just 3 years later in 1974. David went on to search for his real mother when he moved back to New York. On finding his mother, David discovered he did in fact have a half-sister called Roslyn. David's murder spree started in July 1976. He was said to choose his victims carefully, preferring dark-haired or wavy-haired women. Later this was thought to be a reminder of his real mother, who had abandoned him as a baby. Although he was brought up in a loving family, the death of Pearl and his adoptive father remarrying was the reason he had turned into a violent child who had a fascination with setting fires and later on in life taken to killing. On the 29th of July, David, who worked for the US Postal Services, started his rampage with Donna Lauria, who was aged just 18, and Jody Valenti, who was 19. They were finishing a night out at the local disco, and while sitting in Jody's car in the Bronx at approximately 1 a.m, chatting and giggling, when David approached the car, as one of the girls had opened the car door, where he produced a gun from a bag that he was holding. He assumed his rifle position that he had learned from his army days and shot Donna, who died instantly. Jody was shot in her upper leg, and then a third shot which went stray. David packed his gun and fled. After talking to the police, Jody had said that she had not known the shooter. She gave a description which was detailed. There were some witness statements to back up this description from neighbours who had seen the same man sitting in a yellow car, who had been perusing the area just hours before the attack. David had now got the taste of murder and the freedom of not being caught, so his spree continued. On October the 23rd, 1976, couple Carl Denaro and Rosemary Keenan were sitting in a parked car. A loud noise was heard, then the front window of the car shattered. Rosemary was in the driver's side and quickly tried to drive away, not knowing the shot had been aimed at them. Carl had been hit by the bullet in his head and had a metal plate to replace part of his skull due to the shot. But luckily, Rosemary only had a few cuts from the glass from the windscreen of the car. Her dad was a detective in the NYPD, and so all stops were put out to find the shooter. By this time, they had the bullet casing, which was from a .44 caliber weapon. As the two shootings were in different boroughs, they were not quickly linked and continued to be investigated separately. Carl had long, dark, wavy hair. It was thought that at the time he was mistaken for a woman. After a night out at the movies, Donna DeMazy, aged 16, and Joanne Lamino, aged 18, had walked back home. They were sitting on the front porch of Joanne's house talking when a young blonde man in his 20s approached them to ask for directions. As the girls were about to speak, David pulled out the same gun used in all of his previous shootings and shot at both girls, hitting each of them once. He then went on to shoot his weapon a further few times, hitting surrounding buildings. He was seen by a neighbour who had come out to see what the noise was. Donna was shot in the neck and was lucky to not have any life-changing wounds. However, Joanne was not so lucky. The bullet that she took was in her spine and was later declared as paraplegic. This shooting was yet again in another borough, and again the shootings were not connected to any of David's previous attempts at life. The next shooting that David committed was early morning on the 30th of January 1977. The victims named as Christine Freund and John D.L. The engaged couple had just been to see the new Rocky film in the cinema and were on their way to the local dance hall to finish their night out. At 12:40 a.m, 3 gunshots were fired at them, and all 3 had hit the car. John drove away quickly in a panic and tried to find help. He had suffered very few injuries. But Christine had not been so lucky. She had been shot with 2 of David's bullets and died only a few hours later in hospital. Lucky for David, neither victim had seen him, so no description was given to the police department. But one thing that had been taken from this was that there had been several shootings with a .44 caliber gun, and because of the differences in the 2 descriptions that had been given to the police, they assumed they were looking for more than one suspect. The police had started a nationwide hunt for the shooter, now dubbed the .44 caliber killer. Later that year in March, David struck again. This time his victim was named Virginia Voskerichian. She was walking alone, making her way home from college, when an armed man approached her. He wasted no time and shot her in the head. 1 shot, and instantly murdered her. The police released these details in the media, which sparked a frenzied search for this serial killer. David wanted to continue with his killings, and so on April the 17th, 1977, David shot at Alexander S.R., aged 20, and Valentina Siriani, aged just 18. They were close to Valentina's home and sitting in the car when both were shot twice each. She was dead instantly. Alexander lived only for a couple of hours longer and died of his injuries in hospital. Neither were able to give any clues as to who the killer was. At the scene, the police discovered a handwritten letter from the killer, calling himself the son of Sam. Many letters had been left at the murder scenes, laughing at the police for their inadequacies and their lack of suspects for the 5 murders and many attempts at murder. This count was to increase yet again. The next shooting was that of Sal Lupo, aged 20, and Judy Placido, aged just 17. They were sitting in their car discussing local news and talking about the terrifying case of the son of Sam when their car was shot at. 3 shots rippled through the car and hit its victims. Sal was hit in the forearm and survived. Judy was shot in the temple and neck. She also somehow survived the attack. Was David getting sloppy with his shooting? David was now to make his final hit. This happened on the 31st of July 1977 in the early hours. He shot Stacy Moskowitz and Bobby Violante. Stacy had died instantly from the gunshot wound, and Bobby was left blind in one eye and almost blind in the other. But for the son of Sam, this was the end. There was a witness at the scene who was integral to the police in cracking this case. In the end, the police caught David from a parking ticket he got while his car was at a standstill during the murder of Stacy and attempted murder of Bobby. And on August the 10th, 1977, the authorities finally arrested David Berkowitz, who they called the .44 caliber killer, but he called himself the son of Sam. But this was by no means over. Upon his arrest, David had explained to the police that he had been instructed to commit these shootings by his neighbour, Sam Carr, the reason behind his son of Sam name. These messages had apparently been given to him by Sam's Labrador Harvey. This started a lengthy psychological assessment, and it was announced that David was in fact okay to stand trial. He pleaded guilty of 6 killings and amazingly confessed to around 1,500 fires that he had started in and around New York City before the murders began. When the judge stated that David was to be sentenced to 25 years to life for each of the killings, to be served consecutively. As the verdict was given, he attempted to jump out of the courtroom window, which was up on the 7th floor. He was then restrained and shouted that he would kill all of them again, which led to another assessment into his competency of mind. David later changed his story again and resumed it with the fact that he was not directly involved in the killings, but was forced to do them by the cult he was in. David had been subject of many psychological reports, none of which have deemed him unfit to be in mainstream prison. The son of Sam, as he was named by himself, to coincide with the messages he had received from his neighbour's demon dog, was sent to Attica Correctional Facility, where he himself was a victim of an attack. He was slashed across the neck by a fellow inmate. This wound required over 50 stitches. For his safety, he was then moved to Shore and Gunk Correctional Facility, where he will hopefully spend the rest of his life. Although he is now eligible for a parole hearing every 2 years after his guilty plea, he is yet to be released.